Snow clung to the shadowed side of the Sangre de Cristo range like old gauze, and the road east out of Fort Garland ran hard as iron beneath the hooves. Men rode with their collars up and their rifles unbuttoned from their scabbards, because in the spring of 1863 the San Luis Valley kept giving back bodies. Some lay in wagons, some by cold campfires, some near creeks with water pinking the stones. The newspapers in Denver called the killer the Terror of the Valley. The soldiers along the frontier learned another name and spoke it low, the Espinosas, Felipe Nerio. Espinosa and his younger brother, Jose Vicente, had come up the old Spanish road through Taos and into Colorado as freighters and fence menders and men trying to make a living in a land that was changing the rules faster than a family could learn them. Treaties drew borders like knife lines. Sheriffs wrote warrants in a language that didn't ask permission. Whether the first killing was grievance or opportunity is a question with too many answers. What followed is not. Riders were shot from mesquite at 20 paces, pockets turned out. On a few, a knife carved a rough cross where the heart had been. Word spread toward the mountains and the plains at the speed of fear. Some called the brothers highwaymen. Others called them avengers, their kin wronged by soldiers during the war with Mexico, by land agents after, by any man who believed a deed was an oath the land had to honor. A priest in Conejos warned his flock to ride in pairs and to keep their rosaries ready. A trader said they swore to kill 100 gringos in payment for a killing close to home. A woman near Saguache heard shots, then a hymn in a voice she didn't know, then horses moving away. Armies have their patrols. Frontier communities have their posses. Soldiers rode from Fort Garland. Volunteers followed sign until it dissolved in rock and wind. Tracks braided and vanished on the hardpan. Ash looked like every other ash once the rain came. Sheriff Blonger found a camp he thought was theirs and brought back a scuffed pan and a story about riders who let the fire burn down until the stars came close. The killings continued. Then a young soldier stumbled in with a bullet through his shoulder and a tale of 2 men who stepped from Piñon, prayed aloud in Spanish, fired, and stooped to take what they needed. He had played dead and watched their boots move with the slow care of men who had done this many times. The colonel in command sent for a tracker who had the kind of patience the valley respects. Thomas Tate Tobin, scout, hunter, half-legend even then, a man who could tell what had passed by, the way a twig sighed when he touched it. Tobin promised nothing. He filled a poke with jerky, oiled his rifle, and told the soldiers who begged to go that big tracks and many boots only teach a clever fox to circle. He rode light in the mornings and walked at noon when heat made dust talk. He followed small things, a heel mark too sharp for a mustanger, a curl of blue wool the color of a soldier's coat, caught on cholla, a horse apple flattened smooth where a saddle had sat too long. After 3 days, he found a fire ring where coffee had simmered to tar, and ash held the ghost of a boot heel cut like the letter V. He saw them at distance first, 2 specks against the green-gray of the pinyon, then 2 men on a ridge whose silhouettes belonged to men who did not hurry. They camped near La Veta Pass in a fold of land that kept wind off the fire and sound in the grass. Tobin crawled close enough to smell the coffee and the leather. He counted rifles and hands. Felipe wore a dark coat slicked at the elbows. Jose carried himself like the world was a table leaning his way. They sang a verse, ate thick, and settled to smoking, one at a time. At dawn, Tobin made his choice. He slid behind a juniper and waited until Felipe's hat moved above the fire. The rifle ball took him. Jose stood into the smoke and fired blind. The second shot dropped him. Tobin reloaded slower than his pulse wanted. He walked into camp with hands open and eyes down, because mostly dead men still shoot. The Espinosas were finished, 2 bodies quiet beside a fire that went on crackling. The soldiers who had stayed back came up when they heard the second shot go out and become part of the ridge. They helped Tobin lay the bodies proper and take what ID a frontier can take. In some tellings, Tobin brought back the heads in a gunny sack to satisfy a fort that doubted neat reports. In others, he rode in with the bodies slung and a weariness no whiskey could turn. What is true is that Fort Garland saw proof, and the valley's shoulders loosened for the first time in months. But fear seldom ends the day a legend does. That autumn, another string of killings snapped the good sleep out of ranch houses. The dead lay with the same arrangement, pockets turned, horses missing. Rumor, which never needs much tinder, caught. Some said a cousin had taken up the vow. Some said Felipe's son, Julian, barely bearded, stepped into his father's boots. 2 riders were seen on the north rim of the valley wearing coats too warm for the weather. Again they sent for Tobin. He shook his head once and went. This time the trail ran north toward the wet mountain country, into forest thick enough to fold a man into the bark and keep him there. He watched for the V-cut heel and a picket line's scuff in sod damp from afternoon thunder. A band of Utes told him of 2 men who paid in silver, prayed in Spanish, and shot with a stillness that did not belong to hunting. Near Cannon City, Tobin came on a camp at dusk, the fire small, the saddles turned, the rifles close to hand. He waited through a long night while wind found every seam in his coat. At gray light, a young man stood to stretch and walked away a few paces to make water. The boy's face had his father in it. Tobin fired once, then twice. The older man, cousin or uncle, jerked for a weapon he did not reach. Tobin stepped in the way men do who have done this before and are tired of what it does to their sleep. When he came back to Fort Garland the second time, the story hardened. The Espinosa name walked out of the present tense and into campfire talk. The Army wrote it up as bandit suppression, a line item in a ledger with no room for context. Settlers wrote it into folklore of deliverance. Down along the old road, elders told it as a caution about what happens when a land forgets its promises. Afterward, there were trials for lesser men who had ridden close to the brothers, and there were boasts told too loudly in saloons. Tobin bought fresh boots and said little. Years later, when children asked what he had seen, he pointed at the mountains and said only, "Tracks." The people understood. Some stories you tell, some you carry until the country itself tells them for you. What made the Espinosas is the part a court cannot weigh without asking the land itself to testify. Some say a soldier killed a cousin and the law called it accident. Some say a priest humiliated the family and called it repentance. Some say hunger, insult, and the long echo of a war that decided maps faster than mercy made 2 men into something the territory would remember. The truth is not kind to any side. The brothers chose killing. The territory chose a hunter. Both choices left graves. Ride that country now and you can still find pockets of silence where the tale settles. A windstall behind a juniper. A stretch of road where the sage grows thicker and the ravens count slower. The valleys hold history like a cast iron pan holds heat. And near sundown you can hear hooves that are not there and a prayer in a language the mountains keep. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.